close your eyes for just 3 seconds and ask yourself, when was the last time you made a choice that was truly yours? Not your parents' voice in your head, not the algorithm suggestion, not the fear of disappointing someone who isn't even in the room. Just yours. Can't remember? That's because there are 5 places you visit every single day, maybe even right now, that specialize in replacing your will with something else. Something that looks like you, sounds like you, but obeys rules you never agreed to. I'm going to name these places, and I promise you, you're sitting in at least one of them right now. Here's what no one tells you about finding yourself. The problem isn't that you don't know who you are. The problem is that you're trying to discover your identity in spaces specifically designed to prevent it from forming. You've been taught that self-discovery is about introspection, journaling, therapy, meditation. And yes, those help. But they're useless if you're then walking back into 5 environmental traps that systematically dismantle whatever clarity you've gained. This video isn't about adding more self-help practices to your routine. It's about recognizing the places, physical rooms, digital spaces, social contexts, even mental environments that are actively working against your autonomy. These aren't evil places. That's what makes them dangerous. They're often places you're supposed to be, places that society rewards you for inhabiting. What I'm offering you is a framework I developed centuries ago about how reason and freedom actually work, but applied to your modern life in a way that will completely change how you move through the world. You'll learn to identify when a space is using you versus when you're using it. And you'll discover that your true self isn't something you find. It's something you protect by knowing which environments to abandon. Now, before I tell you what these 5 places are, I need you to understand something fundamental about how the self actually works. Because most of what you've been taught about identity is wrong. Not slightly wrong, catastrophically wrong. You see, we talk about finding yourself as if there's this authentic core buried somewhere inside you, waiting to be excavated. Like you're a statue trapped in marble, and all you need to do is chip away the excess stone until the real you emerges. It's a beautiful metaphor. I understand why people love it, but it's not true. The self isn't discovered. It's constructed. And it's constructed through your choices, yes, but more importantly, through the environments in which those choices are made. Think about it like this. Imagine a seed. That seed has potential, certainly. It carries within it the blueprint for a specific kind of tree. But whether that tree actually grows and what shape it takes depends entirely on the soil, the water, the sunlight, the competing plants around it. The seed doesn't find itself. It becomes itself in relationship to everything surrounding it. You are that seed. And the 5 places I'm about to reveal, they're toxic soil. They're environments that look nurturing on the surface, but are actually slowly poisoning your growth. And the most insidious part is that you've been conditioned to believe these places are good for you. That spending time in them makes you responsible, connected, successful, normal. Let me tell you a story. Imagine a carpenter. This carpenter is skilled, talented, has spent years learning his craft. But he works in 5 different workshops throughout his week, and each workshop has been set up by someone else. In the first workshop, all the tools are arranged in a specific way that he didn't choose. He's told exactly which projects to build, in exactly which order, using exactly which methods. He does beautiful work in this space, but none of it is his idea. In the second workshop, the walls are covered in mirrors. Everywhere he looks, he sees himself working. He sees his reflection in the tools, in the wood, in every surface. He becomes so conscious of how he looks while working, so aware of his own image, that he starts choosing projects based on how impressive they'll make him appear rather than what he actually wants to create. In the third workshop, there's no door. People constantly walk in and out. They offer opinions. They make requests. They tell him about their problems. They ask him to fix things that have nothing to do with what he's building. He's never alone with his work. Every decision he makes is interrupted by someone else's needs. In the fourth workshop, all the windows are painted black. He has no idea what time it is, what season it is, whether the sun has risen or set. He loses track of natural rhythms. He works when he's told to work, rests when he's told to rest. His body's own signals become irrelevant. And in the fifth workshop, everything is perfect. The space is beautiful, comfortable, filled with every tool he could possibly need. But none of those tools actually belong to him. They belong to someone else who could walk in at any moment and take them away. So he never fully invests in any project. He never takes real risks. He only builds things that won't get him in trouble with the owner of the tools. After 30 years of rotating through these 5 workshops, this carpenter wakes up one day and realizes something terrifying. He has no idea what he would build if left alone. Every creation has been shaped by the constraints of these rooms. His hands have skill, yes, but no original vision. His craft is impeccable, but his craft itself was chosen by the architecture of his spaces. This is what's happening to your selfhood right now. You think you're making choices, but you're actually just responding to environmental prompts, so subtle you've mistaken them for your own thoughts. You think you know who you are, but that identity has been assembled piece by piece in spaces that were never designed for your authentic development. Now let me show you something even more disturbing. Imagine you could write a letter to yourself. Not the you of today, but the you of 20 years from now. And here's the twist. The version of you writing that letter has spent the next 2 decades in the exact same 5 places you're inhabiting right now. Same bedroom, same office, same social circles, same apps, same mental loops, same relationships, same routines. What would that future version of you say in that letter? Really think about it. Would they thank you for staying in those spaces? Would they tell you that all that time spent in those environments helped you become who you were meant to be? Or would the letter be filled with something much quieter and much more devastating? Not anger, not blame, but a kind of grief. The grief of someone who can finally see what you couldn't see when you were living it. The future you might write something like this. I don't blame you for not knowing. How could you have known? Everyone around you was in the same rooms. Everyone told you this was normal. This was life. This was what being an adult looked like. But I need you to understand what those places cost us. Not in some dramatic, obvious way. We didn't have a breakdown. We didn't fail. In fact, by most measures, we succeeded. But there was a version of us that never got to exist. A person we could have become, choices we could have made, a life we could have lived that required different soil to grow in. And we never even knew it was possible because those 5 rooms made certain thoughts unthinkable. They made certain dreams invisible. They made certain versions of us impossible to even imagine. The tragedy of the unexamined environment is that you don't feel it suffocating you. It's not dramatic. You don't wake up choking. Instead, it just makes certain possibilities vanish from your awareness entirely. You look at your life and say, I'm fine, while the person you could have become slowly starves to death in an unlocked room. And here's what makes this so hard to see. These 5 places feel normal. They feel like just life, like the basic structure of existence. But they're not. They're choices that someone made. Sometimes you, sometimes society, sometimes both. And those choices have consequences that echo through every aspect of who you're becoming. So what are these 5 places? And why do they have such power over who you're becoming? Let me walk you through them one by one. And I need you to be honest with yourself as I describe them. Not judgmental, not harsh, just honest. Because recognition is the first step toward freedom. The first dangerous place is what I call the room of constant judgment. And I need you to understand what I mean by this because it's subtler than you think. This isn't just about social media, though that's certainly part of it. This is any space, physical or mental, where you cannot act without immediately evaluating how you'll be perceived. This is your social media feed, yes, where every thought you share is instantly measured by likes and comments and reactions. But it's also your family dinner table when certain topics come up and you find yourself editing your words before they leave your mouth. It's your workplace where every idea has to go through 12 approval layers and 3 committees before it can be tried. It's the friend group where you've learned exactly which opinions are acceptable and which will make everyone uncomfortable. But here's the part that will really disturb you. The room of constant judgment isn't just external. You've internalized it. You've built a version of this room inside your own mind. There's a part of you that's constantly watching yourself, evaluating yourself, measuring yourself against standards you can't even articulate. You're not just worried about what others think. You've become your own harshest, most relentless judge. Let me tell you what this does to you. The catastrophe of constant judgment is that it makes authenticity impossible. Not because you're fake, not because you're trying to deceive anyone, but because authentic action requires experimentation. It requires failure. It requires mess. Real development, real growth, real discovery of who you are. These things only happen when you can try something without knowing if it will work. When you can fail without it defining you. When you can be clumsy and uncertain and still okay. But in the room of constant judgment, every move is evaluated. Every mistake is evidence. Every imperfect attempt becomes part of your permanent record. So you stop experimenting. You stop taking risks. You optimize for approval rather than truth. You become a performance of a self rather than a self that's genuinely developing. And here's the paradox that I need you to really hear. You think judgment keeps you moral. You think that constant self-evaluation is what makes you a good person. That if you stop judging yourself so harshly, you become selfish or cruel or lazy. But actually, the opposite is true. Morality requires autonomous choice. Real goodness, real ethical action can only come from someone who is genuinely free to choose otherwise. If you're only good because you're afraid of judgment, whether that's the judgment of others or your own internalized judge, then you're not actually good. You're just obedient. You're just compliant. And obedience to external evaluation is the death of the will. Think about it this way. Imagine a child who shares their toys with others, but only because they're terrified their parents will punish them if they don't. Is that child learning generosity? No, they're learning fear. They're learning to perform the behavior that avoids punishment, but they're not developing the internal compass that makes generosity feel right. You're doing the same thing right now, probably in multiple areas of your life. You're being good in ways that have nothing to do with your actual values and everything to do with avoiding judgment. You're making choices based not on what you believe is right, but on what will make you look right. And every time you do this, you're strengthening the room of constant judgment. You're giving it more power over you. I watch people spend years in therapy trying to build self-esteem, trying to learn to love themselves, trying to develop confidence. And then they walk right back into the room of constant judgment and wonder why all that work evaporates. It's because you can't build a self in a space that's constantly evaluating that self. It's like trying to let a wound heal while someone keeps poking it to see if it's better yet. So how do you know if you're in this room right now? Ask yourself, when was the last time you did something just for you, with no one watching, with no way to prove you did it, with no possibility of it improving your reputation or image? When was the last time you made a choice that no one would ever applaud, that might even make people think less of you, but that felt deeply true to something inside you? If you can't remember, you're in the room of constant judgment, and it's killing the part of you that could be free. Now, the second dangerous place is in some ways the opposite of the first, but it's equally destructive. I call it the room without resistance. This is any environment that never challenges you, never creates productive friction, never pushes back on your assumptions, or forces you to defend your beliefs. This is your comfort zone, but it's more specific than that. It's the algorithm that only shows you content you already agree with. It's the friend group where everyone shares your exact same political views, your same lifestyle choices, your same cultural references. It's the career path that's safe, where you know exactly what's expected and you're good at meeting those expectations. It's the daily routine that's so deeply grooved you could do it unconscious, and sometimes you do. It's also the information diet where you only consume content that confirms what you already believe. The media outlets that tell you you're right to think what you think. The books that reinforce your existing worldview. The conversations where everyone is just agreeing with each other and calling it dialogue. Now, you might be thinking, wait, didn't you just tell me the room of constant judgment was destroying me? Now you're saying I need resistance and challenge? Which is it? And this is where you need to understand something crucial about how the self actually develops. There's a difference between destructive judgment and productive resistance. Destructive judgment evaluates your worth as a person based on your performance. It's personal. It's totalizing. It says, you failed, therefore you're a failure. Productive resistance, on the other hand, challenges your ideas, your assumptions, your reasoning, but it doesn't attack your fundamental value as a human being. It says, this idea might not work. Can you defend it? This assumption might be flawed. Where did it come from? This conclusion might be hasty. What's your evidence? And here's what I discovered in my work, what I spent years trying to articulate. The self is built through resistance, not through trauma, not through suffering for its own sake, but through the kind of friction that forces you to articulate what you actually believe when it's challenged. Think about it like this. Imagine your beliefs are like muscles. If you never use them, never test them, never push them beyond their comfort zone, they don't grow stronger. They atrophy. They become weak and flabby, incapable of supporting you when you actually need them. When you live in the room without resistance, you think you're being true to yourself. You feel comfortable. You feel like you know who you are, but you're actually just drifting. Your beliefs aren't tested, so they're not really yours, they're just habits. Your values aren't chosen through conscious deliberation. They're inherited, absorbed, collected like dust. You feel like yourself, but you're actually a collection of unopposed defaults. Let me give you a concrete example. Let's say you believe something, it doesn't matter what, pick any strong opinion you have. You believe that a certain political position is correct, or that a certain way of raising children is best, or that a certain approach to work is most ethical. Where did that belief come from? Did you arrive at it through careful reasoning, weighing different perspectives, genuinely considering the alternatives? Or did you absorb it from your environment and never have it challenged? If you spent years in the room without resistance, surrounded by people who all believe the same thing, consuming media that all says the same thing, your belief isn't actually yours in any meaningful sense. It's just the belief of your environment. And the scary part is, if you suddenly found yourself in a different environment with different people and different information, that belief would probably shift just as easily, because it was never rooted in your own autonomous reasoning to begin with. This is why people have such fragile ideologies, why they can't defend what they believe when challenged, why they either crumble immediately or become defensive and hostile. Because their beliefs were never forged in the fire of genuine dialogue and resistance. They're just decorative, like furniture they've arranged in their mind because it looks nice, not because it serves any structural purpose. The paradox here is one that people really struggle with. Comfort doesn't preserve your true self. It actually prevents it from forming. Because the self is not a thing you have, like a possession you can protect by keeping it safe. The self is a thing you forge, like metal heated and hammered and shaped. And that process requires resistance. It requires pressure. It requires something pushing back against you. This is why people who seem so confident and sure of themselves often fall apart when they face real opposition. Because their confidence was built in a room where no one ever disagreed. It was never tested. An untested confidence isn't real confidence. It's just ignorance of your own fragility. So how do you know if you're in the room without resistance? Listen to your conversations. When was the last time someone genuinely disagreed with you about something important, and instead of getting defensive, you were actually curious? When was the last time you had your mind changed by a conversation? When was the last time you voluntarily sought out a perspective that you knew would challenge something you believe? If these things aren't happening, you're in the room without resistance. And you're not growing. You're just calcifying. The third dangerous place is one that's particularly relevant to your modern life, and it's what I call the room of infinite distraction. This is any space, mental or physical, where sustained attention on one thing becomes impossible. Where your focus is constantly fragmented, constantly interrupted, constantly pulled in 17 different directions at once. Your phone is the obvious villain here. I don't even need to explain that, do I? You know exactly what I'm talking about. The way you pick it up without even deciding to. The way you check it while you're in the middle of another task. The way your attention has been trained to hop from thing to thing to thing, never landing, never settling, never going deep. But it's not just your phone. It's open offices where you can't have a single thought without being interrupted. It's homes where the television is always on, always chattering in the background. It's relationships where conversations are constantly interrupted by notifications, by other people, by the internal urge to flee from anything that requires sustained presence. It's also, and this is the part people miss, the internal room where your mind has trained itself to flee from anything difficult within 30 seconds. Where the moment something gets uncomfortable, confusing, or boring, you immediately reach for distraction. You've taught yourself that you don't have to tolerate discomfort for even a moment, because there's always something easier, something more pleasant, something more immediately gratifying just to swipe away. Now, most people think the danger of distraction is that it makes you unproductive, that you're wasting time, that you're not getting enough done, that you need better time management or stronger discipline. And sure, that's true on some level, but that's not the real danger. That's not what's actually being destroyed. The real danger is this. The self is built through sustained attention. Who you are, what you're capable of, the depth of your thoughts, the quality of your relationships, your capacity for meaning. All of this requires the ability to stay with something even when it's difficult, even when it's boring, even when something more immediately pleasant is available. When you spend years in the room of infinite distraction, when you train yourself to fragment your focus constantly, you create a fragmented identity. You become reactive rather than authorial. You live in response mode rather than creation mode. You stop being someone who acts on the world and become someone who just responds to stimuli like a very complicated machine. Let me paint you a picture of what this looks like. Imagine two people. They both wake up in the morning. The first person immediately reaches for their phone. Before they've even registered what day it is, before they've felt what they actually need, they're already responding to what other people need from them. Messages, emails, news, someone else's emergency, someone else's opinion, someone else's crisis. Their first conscious thoughts of the day aren't their own. They're reactions to external input. This person moves through their entire day like this, working on something until a notification pulls them away, starting a conversation until they're interrupted by their own mind, which has learned that nothing deserves sustained attention. They might spend 12 hours being productive, but they never actually enter a state of flow, never actually go deep on anything, never actually have the experience of losing themselves in something meaningful. The second person wakes up and spends the first 30 minutes of their day in silence, not meditating necessarily, not doing anything special, just being with themselves, noticing what they're thinking, feeling what they're feeling, maybe writing, maybe walking, maybe just sitting with coffee. But there's no external input, no one else's agenda colonizing their consciousness before they've even figured out what their own agenda is. This person moves through their day differently. Yes, they have obligations. Yes, they respond to messages and attend meetings and do all the things that modern life requires. But there's a quality of presence, of intentionality that the first person has lost. When they're with someone, they're actually there. When they're working on something, they can go deep. When they're faced with difficulty, they can tolerate the discomfort long enough to push through to the other side. Same number of hours in the day, same basic responsibilities, but completely different experiences of being alive. And here's what's heartbreaking. The first person doesn't even know what they're missing. Because you can't miss what you've never experienced. If you've spent years training yourself for distraction, you don't know what sustained attention feels like anymore. You've forgotten, or maybe you never knew. The paradox of the room of infinite distraction is that you think it's a personal failing. You think you just need more discipline, more willpower, more productivity hacks. You beat yourself up for not being able to focus. You try out blockers and phone fasts and digital detoxes. And sometimes these help for a little while, but then you slide right back into the same patterns. And the reason is this: willpower is finite. Discipline is a limited resource, but environment is constant. If you're trying to fix yourself while remaining in distraction architecture, you will fail. Not because you're weak, not because you're lazy, but because you're fighting against the fundamental design of your environment. It's like trying to swim against a current that's stronger than you are. You can do it for a little while, using all your strength, all your will. But eventually, you're going to get tired. And when you get tired, the current is still going to be there, pulling you right back to where you started. This is why I keep emphasizing environment over willpower, because most self-help focuses on changing you, making you stronger, more disciplined, more focused. But I'm telling you, you don't need to be stronger. You need to change the current. The fourth dangerous place might be the most insidious of all, because it's the one that feels most like success. I call it the room of borrowed purpose. And this is any space where your goals are actually someone else's goals that you've internalized so completely you think they're yours. This is the career you chose because your parents valued it, because they told you it was respectable, stable, impressive. This is the relationship structure you're forcing yourself into because everyone does it this way, because being single or polyamorous or child-free is seen as somehow lesser or incomplete. This is the city you live in because it's where successful people go, where the opportunities are, where you're supposed to be if you're ambitious. It's the metrics you're measuring yourself against, the money, the followers, the status, the achievements that you never actually sat down and decided mattered to you. They just do. They matter because everyone around you acts like they matter. Because society has decided these are the measures of a life well lived. Because you've been swimming in these values for so long, you can't even see them as values anymore. They just seem like reality. The horror of the room of borrowed purpose is that it feels like ambition. It feels like you're working hard, striving, becoming someone. You feel busy, productive, like you're moving forward. Your calendar is full. Your bank account is growing. Your resume is impressive. From the outside, you're succeeding. But inside, there's something else. A kind of quiet desperation that you might not even have words for. A sense that you're succeeding at the wrong life. That you're winning a game you never wanted to play. That you're climbing a ladder propped against the wrong wall. And most painful part, you might not realize it for decades. Because the room of borrowed purpose gives you just enough external validation to keep you going. Your parents are proud. Your peers are impressed. Your social media posts get likes. You look successful. So you must be successful, right? But there's a difference between achievement and fulfillment. There's a difference between being good at something and caring about it. There's a difference between succeeding according to external metrics and living in alignment with your actual values. Let me tell you about something I noticed in my own life and in the lives of people I studied. There are people who spend their entire lives doing things they're good at but don't care about. They develop skills, they gain expertise, they become recognized authorities in fields that bore them. And they do this because somewhere along the way, they confused ability with purpose. They thought, I'm good at this, so this must be what I'm meant to do. But being good at something doesn't make it meaningful to you. You could be excellent at something that slowly kills your soul. You could be successful at something that makes you feel empty. And if you're in the room of borrowed purpose, you might spend your entire life in this state, competent, accomplished, and quietly miserable. The tragedy is that the room of borrowed purpose is often the most socially rewarded space. Think about it. If you're pursuing the goals that society values, everyone encourages you. Everyone tells you you're on the right track. Your choices make sense to people. They're legible. They're respectable. But if you step outside the room of borrowed purpose, if you start pursuing goals that are actually yours but don't fit the standard template of success, suddenly everyone's concerned. Everyone has opinions. Everyone wants to know, are you sure that's a good idea? What about stability? What about retirement? What about what people will think? And this is how the room of borrowed purpose maintains its power. It's not just that you've internalized these goals. It's that the entire structure of society is set up to reward you for staying in this room and punish you for leaving it. Here's the paradox. The room of borrowed purpose feels safe. It feels responsible. It feels like you're being an adult, making mature choices, doing what you're supposed to do. But actually, it's a betrayal of the self. It's choosing to live someone else's idea of a good life instead of discovering your own. And the self, your actual, authentic self, cannot emerge when it's constantly trying to fulfill externally imposed standards. Freedom isn't doing whatever you want in every moment. That's just impulsiveness. Freedom is knowing which wants are actually yours, and which are just the wants you've absorbed from your environment. Think about it like this. If you cleared away everything you think you're supposed to want, every goal you're supposed to have, every version of success you're supposed to pursue, what would be left? If you removed your parents' voices, your culture's values, your industry's standards, your peers' expectations, what would you actually care about? Most people can't answer that question. Not because they don't have authentic desires, but because those desires have been buried under so many layers of borrowed purpose that they can't access them anymore. So how do you know if you're in the room of borrowed purpose? Ask yourself, if no one would ever know what I chose, if there was no way to prove my choices to anyone, if my decisions couldn't improve my reputation or status or how people see me, would I still make the same choices I'm making now? If the answer is no, or if you're not sure, you're in the room of borrowed purpose, and you're building a life that isn't yours. Now, before I tell you about the fifth and final dangerous place, I need you to notice something. Everything I've said so far has been pushing you toward autonomy, toward independence, toward freedom from external influence. I've told you to escape judgment, to seek your own path, to question borrowed purposes, to resist distraction. I've been advocating for a kind of radical self-determination. And now I'm going to tell you something that might seem like a complete contradiction of everything I've said. But it's not. It's the completion of the picture. Because the fifth dangerous place is the room of radical isolation. And this is any space where you're completely cut off from meaningful dialogue and relationship. This is the room of pure individualism. The mindset that says, I don't need anyone. I'll figure it out alone. I don't need other people's input, their perspectives, their challenges. I am sufficient unto myself. It's the physical isolation of remote work where weeks can pass without meaningful human contact. It's the emotional isolation where you've become so self-sufficient, so independent, so focused on your own path that you've forgotten how to be genuinely with another person. It's the intellectual isolation where you only engage with your own thoughts, your own theories, your own conclusions, never subjecting them to the test of dialogue with someone who might see things differently. It's also the isolation of cynicism, where you've decided that other people aren't trustworthy, that relationships are just transactions, that everyone is out for themselves, so you might as well be too. Where vulnerability feels like weakness and asking for help feels like failure. And here's where I need to be very careful, because this is the most nuanced and difficult point I'm going to make. You need autonomy. You need to escape the rooms of constant judgment and borrowed purpose. You need to develop your own capacity for reason, your own ability to think for yourself. Everything I've said about that is true and important. But, and this is crucial, the self cannot be built in total isolation. You cannot become who you're meant to be entirely alone. And if you try, you'll end up creating a different kind of prison, one that's just as destructive as the other four rooms, but much harder to recognize because it feels like freedom. Let me explain why. The deepest paradox of selfhood is this. You need autonomy, but you need autonomy in relationship. You need to be free from coercion, but connected to community. You need to think for yourself, but in dialogue with others. The self is not a solo project. It's formed in relationship, with other people, with ideas, with reality itself pushing back on you and shaping you and challenging you. Think about language. You didn't develop language alone. You learned it in relationship, in conversation, in the back and forth of communication with other human beings. And even now, your thoughts, the most private, interior things about you, are shaped by language, which means they're shaped by your relationships with others. Or think about your values. Even the ones you've consciously chosen, the ones you've reasoned through carefully, you developed them in response to something. Maybe in response to values you saw in others and wanted to emulate. Maybe in response to values you saw and rejected. But either way, in relationship, the self doesn't develop in a vacuum. It develops through encounter, through meeting something outside yourself that forces you to articulate who you are and what you believe. Through relationships where you have to translate your interior world into something another person can understand. Through the experience of being seen, being challenged, being misunderstood, and then trying again to explain yourself. Here's what I mean practically. Imagine someone who takes all my advice about autonomy and isolation to its extreme. They leave the room of constant judgment and decide they don't care at all what anyone thinks. They leave the room of borrowed purpose and pursue only what they individually want. They leave the room of infinite distraction and spend all their time alone with their own thoughts. They leave the room without resistance, and, well, they end up creating resistance by isolating themselves from everyone. This person seems free. They're not influenced by others. They're not distracted by external noise. They're completely self-determined. But something's wrong. Their thoughts start going in circles. Their beliefs become rigid because they're never challenged. Their sense of reality becomes distorted because it's never checked against anyone else's experience. They become eccentric in ways that aren't creative, but just disconnected. They lose the ability to relate, to connect, to be vulnerable, to let someone else matter to them. This person hasn't found freedom. They've just traded one prison for another. They've escaped the rooms where other people control them, but they've entered a room where they're completely alone. And loneliness isn't freedom. It's just loneliness. The fully isolated self isn't free. It's just alone. And a self that never has to justify itself, never has to translate its inner world to another consciousness, never has to be truly seen. That self doesn't fully exist. It's a ghost. It's a theoretical entity that never gets tested against the reality of relationship. This is why hermits and monks and people who withdraw completely from society so often seem strange when you encounter them. Not because they're enlightened, some are, but because they've lost the ability to be with other human beings. Their autonomy has curdled into something else. Something that looks like wisdom, but is really just disconnection. So what's the answer? How do you maintain your autonomy while avoiding the trap of isolation? This is the hardest balance to strike, and I'm not going to pretend I have a simple solution. But here's what I've learned. You need relationships, but you need relationships with people who respect your autonomy. You need dialogue, but you need dialogue with people who can challenge you without crushing you. You need community, but you need community that allows for individuality. You need to be seen, but seen by people who don't require you to perform or conform to be worthy of being seen. This is rare. This is precious. And if you haven't found these relationships, it might actually be better to be alone than to be in relationships that destroy your autonomy. But the goal isn't isolation. The goal is finding or creating relationships where both things can exist. Connection and autonomy, intimacy and independence, being seen and being free. The paradox is that you need resistance, but loving resistance. You need challenge, but compassionate challenge. You need people who will push back on your ideas without attacking your worth, who will tell you when you're wrong without making you feel worthless, who will hold you accountable without controlling you. And these relationships require something from you too. They require vulnerability. They require the willingness to be wrong. They require the capacity to listen, really listen, to someone who sees things differently than you do. They require you to care about something outside yourself, to let another person matter to you in a way that gives them some claim on you. So if this conversation has landed for you, if you felt something shift in how you see your own life, if you recognize yourself in these 5 rooms and you're starting to imagine a different way of being, I want to hear from you. Go to the comments and tell me, which room did you recognize yourself in most clearly? Which one hit you the hardest? Which one are you most afraid to leave? Or maybe there's a 6th room, a 7th room, spaces I didn't name that you think are just as dangerous. Share your experience. Not for me. I'm centuries gone. But for each other. Because one of the ways we escape these rooms is by naming them together, by realizing we're not alone in this struggle, by building a community of people who are committed to consciousness and autonomy and genuine human flourishing. And if this perspective helped you, if it gave you permission to reimagine your environment, if it offered you a framework for understanding your own struggles, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. Not because I need the validation, but because you deserve to fill your feed with ideas that challenge you rather than just confirm what you already think. You deserve to be in environments, even digital environments, that push you toward growth rather than just comfort, that offer you resistance rather than just agreement, that treat you like a thinking being capable of reason rather than just a consumer of content. Choose your rooms carefully. Build your spaces intentionally. Protect your attention fiercely. Question your purposes relentlessly. Connect with people courageously. You're building yourself right now. In this moment, in whatever room you're sitting in, make sure it's a room that deserves you.